I'm Lisa Irwin, Vice Chancellor for Student Life and Dean of Students, and I'm very honored to moderate this event today, an important one for our campus. There are some local elected officials that I want to recognize before we get started. Mayor Emily Larson is here. City Councilor Eric Forsman. Where's Mayor Larson?
They're both right there.
All right.
Yeah.
City Councilor Zach Filippovich.
Right there.
And we saw former Mayor Don Ness here too. So a round of applause, please, for our elected officials. Thank you. Colleagues, this is truly a momentous time in our university's history. For only the 17th time since 1851, the University of Minnesota is searching for its next president. And at the start of the search advisory committee visited all 5 campuses across our beautiful state to gather input from our campus communities. Your input had tremendous impact on the deliberations that ultimately brought Provost Gabel to our campus today. And now we're back where it all started, getting input from the university community. Provost Gabel is traveling to all 5 campuses this week before her interview with the Board of Regents on Friday, and this is one of 5 public forums that will be held this week. So after the forum today, you have the opportunity to provide your feedback directly to the Board of Regents on the Presidential Search website. And there are cards outside the theater today where you can get that website and directly enter your feedback. So before I introduce our presidential finalists, I'll explain our format for the day. Provost Gabel will make a few remarks, and then we'll turn right into Q&A. And if you'd like to ask a question, please write your question on a note card and get it to one of our staff in the audience. And if you didn't get a card on your way in, raise your hand, and one of those folks will make sure you get one. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our finalists for the position of the University of Minnesota's 17th President, Joan T.A. Gabel. Provost Gabel currently serves as the Executive Vice President for Academic Affairs and Provost at the University of South Carolina, a position she's held since 2015. She was previously the Dean of the University of Missouri's Trulas College of Business, and prior to that, she held faculty and administrative positions at Florida State and Georgia State University. Provost Gabel earned her bachelor's degree in philosophy from Haverford College in Pennsylvania and her Juris Doctor from the University of Georgia. She and her husband Gary have 3 children, a daughter who lives and works in Seattle, a son who's a junior in college, and a son who's a junior in high school. And I was really excited to learn that Provost Gabel is a hockey fan. Having lived in Montreal, and when she lived in Atlanta, she watched the Atlanta Thrashers, which means she will feel very comfortable in the home of the reigning NCAA Division I men's hockey champions.
Yeah, I heard a little something about that.
The UMD Bulldogs.
Congratulations.
And a warm welcome for Provost Gabel. Please join me.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much to Lisa, of course, for that kind introduction that my mother wrote. And of course, thank you to all of you for being here, stopping your day during finals week, those of you coming in from the community and stopping your day and coming to say hello and sharing with me the passion that you have for this fine institution and for what it means to elect and select a president who will recognize its importance here, its importance to the system, its importance to the state. It's an incredible honor. I'm really humbled to be here and really looking forward to being able to hear your questions and give you some more information about me or learn together about what the future might hold. But before we do that, I just want to really quickly thank a few people. So first of all, as you might imagine, to roll in and do a day like this takes a lot of work here on campus. So can we give the people here in Duluth who set all of this up a round of applause, please? I also want to thank, there are 2 members from this campus who served on the Presidential Search Advisory Committee, Lynn and Rajiv. Rajiv couldn't be here today, but Lynn Williams did all of the pretty heavy lift representing this campus and also thinking about the position as a whole across the state. And that was a wonderful experience for me to be able to converse with them and the other members of the committee throughout the process. So very grateful to them, very grateful to all of you who participated in the listening sessions and gave your feedback. What resulted from that as a candidate was a very clear picture of your hopes, dreams, wishes, desires, expectations and things that you see as possibilities for the future. It is a beautiful list. It's a list that's extremely appealing and attractive. It's the reason that I'm here today, so I'm very grateful to you for that. And of course, I'm very grateful to all of the people who are taking me all over the state. They have stopped their lives for a solid week so that I'm able to be here, so I'm very grateful to them too. So I'll stop there because I know most of what you want to hear about are responses to your questions and see where that takes our conversation. So thank you very much.
All right, let's get started. So a recent Star Tribune article about you.
Sorry, that's still a very strange thing to hear at the beginning of the question.
Highlighted your commitment to diversity in
Yes.
student and faculty recruiting and in terms of the way we receive services. So we're very passionate here on our campus about those issues. We support diversity and inclusion, and so we'd like to hear more about how that's worked, what kinds of things that you've done to address inequity.
Yes, so this is, the answer that I'm going to give is to some degree I should give a context for, because of course the work that I'm doing today is occurring at the University of South Carolina, which is, there are some things if we had more time to discuss that I think you would find familiar, but there are some pretty distinct differences, including the history of the state of South Carolina, which in many ways is fine and glorious and in some ways is painful. And that does give us direction and North Stars in terms of what the university can do to try to mitigate, rectify, and respond to inequities in a variety of ways with a variety of constituencies. And the approach that we've taken has really been to try to create layers, some of which are pretty operational, like how we deploy recruiters so that we can create a more robust representative incoming class year over year, how we work amongst the faculty in multiple ways, but in particular to make sure that they have implicit bias training in their own searches in the desire to recruit and retain a representative faculty, and also so that they have resources in order to create robust conversations in their classrooms and feel that they have the tools and training to address difficult topics in ways that create good learning outcomes. And then we really try to create a positive, inclusive, welcoming sense of belonging in our campus climate. And that's not something you can just hope for, although we do absolutely hope for it. You have to work at it regularly. So we do that with good support services, good counseling, and a lot of events and open conversations, sometimes about very difficult topics, but in balanced ways with the information that our faculty as subject matter experts and our students as curious learners are able to come together and provide. And then we measure it, and sometimes it looks great and sometimes it doesn't, and then we use those measures against the goals that we've set for ourselves to try to improve on a regular basis. And that's, in a nutshell, many years of work that really is just a starting point. The work has gone well. We're a 7-year in a row HEED Award winner, which is the Higher Education Equity and Diversity Award winner. A few weeks ago, APLU honored the University of South Carolina for inclusion, and awards are nice. They're nice recognition of the work, but they really only represent that we've met with some success the starting point in what is a long journey towards really trying to create true equity.
One of the questions we received is a great follow-up. Please let us know what you're planning to do to balance the interests of different ethnic groups.
That's a really good question, and it's a very interesting challenge because there is, when you're both busy and resource constrained, this human nature towards trying to find one solution to try to solve a problem and then implement that solution. And I think, as we all know, that's not going to work when we're talking about equity and when we talk about the unique challenges and opportunities that we all bring to the table by virtue of our unique perspectives, discrete characteristics, personal history, and connections to different cultures and points of view. And so we really look at it as multicultural, and that the value is in the multicultural perspective. We really try to be purposeful about getting out of what can sometimes become echo chambers in who we receive input from, that we have a real round table, three-dimensional discussion with students, faculty, and staff who we shift to reflect different points of view, different personal perspectives, different histories, different cultural perspectives, et cetera, et cetera. And then we try to set programming in short increments, so we don't actually do long-term planning because we know that different challenges and needs will come up really we really look at it on a semester by semester basis so that we're able to be nimble and respond to either current events of the day or recognize historical trends or situations, but in real-time context.
Good. How would you balance being president for the whole system while being de facto chancellor for one campus as well?
Yeah, I've heard that question before. You might not be surprised to hear. So I will say that I have a tremendous mentor in what is a difficult job, if you want to sort of try to condense it down to that, in that the University of South Carolina system is organized the same way, where Harris Pastides is both the president of the system, and several of us wear system officer hats and the campus in Columbia hat. I've also worked in a system where there was a separate system office and there was a system president, and each campus, regardless of size, had its own chancellor. So I've seen both, and I feel a lot of affinity for the organization that's here in Minnesota, but I do absolutely recognize that there's a balance to be struck. I've heard that word many times over the last few days and several times today, probably also not a surprise, between respecting the work of the leadership teams here, the chancellor's team, faculty, staff, and student teams, and the vision that is set on this campus, the contributions of this campus to what is going on here in Duluth and in northern Minnesota, and also seeing that there is a systemness, which is a new word that we've coined, I think, very recently, systemness about the value of being connected and how that enables us to serve the state, of course, as core mission, but also do innovative things in the classroom, in our research, and in our service to the state, how we approach that. And so how you strike a balance is a lever pull, sometimes a tug of war, and sometimes a collaboration, depending on how out of balance you are, of course. And I would be a little bit ahead of myself if I said, here's exactly what the tweaking of that balance looks like. But what I can say is I've received a tremendous amount of really positive, helpful feedback on what it might look like. And so I feel very confident that in the next chapter with your next president, it would be a balance that really could be actively struck in a very shared governance, shared input method.
What are your thoughts about a merit pay system for pay increases, both in theory and in practice?
That's a really good question,
Yes.
and one that I talked to the general counsel at the University of South Carolina about just a couple of days ago. So I've worked at a few universities. I've worked at a university that the faculty were unionized, and of course worked at universities where they weren't. And you would be surprised how disparate the merit versus cost of living, the methodology of creating financial incentives around performance, I'll just say that broadly, how disparate that is, and sometimes not locationally where you would expect it to be, where the challenges don't necessarily align with some of the historical political climates that you might expect in terms of bargaining. And so I was a business school dean, and one of the first things you learn, the lights are in my eyes, but I'm looking around at some of the business school faculty, and I suspect even if you're not business school faculty, this won't be an expression that surprises you, that people do what they're incented to do is a core adage in organizational behavior. But I also recognize that incentives aren't always money. Now, of course, everybody likes money, and we have to be purposeful and careful about that. But I really think that merit and recognition, acknowledgement of good work really needs to be done in a three-dimensional way. Because speaking for faculty, not to the exclusion of students and staff, but just as an example, I have colleagues who would say very directly to me, I mean, I'm never going to say no to more money, but what I really need is time, grad students in my lab, recognition, feeling like the person next to me who is underperforming me isn't being over-rewarded, a sense of fairness. And that can be a very individual thing. And I believe in trying to find that as much as you can in a complicated and large system.
Well, I want to acknowledge that this could take the rest of the hour.
It's true.
What specifically about UMD impresses or intrigues you?
Oh.
Right, folks? A whole hour, right?
Let me see if we have time. So there are several things. I will tell you a couple of the things that I hear about the most already that I think are very interesting, and some of them are specific, but I think they reflect a philosophy that I'm only getting a taste of, that you can't master in a few hours. So when you look at the way in which this campus serves students, the type of instruction that you have, and the way in which this campus does research, you see a really unique niche that you'd be somewhat hard-pressed to find a head-to-head comparator, because there is a very robust set of units on campus providing programs in which there's obviously student demand that create a really nice both general education environment and also applied experiences for the students who pursue that, and graduate programs as well. And there's a very robust research environment, particularly for a campus of this size, with this size student population. There's a lot of productivity, if you'll excuse me for using that word, in terms of the scholarship and all the different ways that occurs. But there's this very interesting research perspective that may or may not be what individual faculty are pursuing, but that comes up off the page in the aggregate in doing exploration of questions that are really to the benefit of the state, but also have the potential for national and global impact. And you don't see that kind of sweet spot very often. So the work that's being done in that way is in no way intended to be a lack of complement to other areas of research that may or may not have anything to do with the state. But the fact that that can all coexist here, I think, is pretty remarkable, and I'd really like to understand how that happened and what it means and learn more about the research that's going on.
Great. The mission of UMD is to integrate liberal education, research, creative activity, and public engagement while preparing students to thrive as lifelong learners and globally engaged citizens. Please tell us what your vision for UMD is and how you see UMD fitting within the University of Minnesota system.
Yeah, articulating a vision with nice bullet points really tight for you, it's a little early for that. So the exact verbiage, nicely crafted of a vision, I hope you'll indulge me in giving me a little runway to get that going. But the idea of offering the opportunities for students, obviously in this region, which is done very well, but I mean, I've looked at the demographics of your students and they come from all over the state and from out of state as well, and being a home for that. Having the type of research that you're doing be a spine, but having also the climate where you can have offshoots of that. I've learned about some of the global experiences that you offer here and how all that fits together, and also really great athletics. When you think, obviously national champ, reigning national champ, and what that means for an overall campus community experience, town and gown experience, and also impact on the state. I really think that's what systemness means, is that you have that available to the students of the state here or wherever they may come from, and it's the contribution to the community and the knowledge base here or wherever it may have impact. So that's probably not as tight as it's going to be one day if it's on a PowerPoint slide, but I hope that it gives you a sense of what I'm starting to see at this phase.
The President's Initiative on Sexual Misconduct has had a meaningful impact in Duluth and across the U of M system. Can you talk a little bit about your knowledge of sexual assault, misconduct prevention and response in a university setting?
Yes, so of course one of the hardest and most painful things that we work on as administrators is, of course we all commit to the safety of our students and are heartsick, for lack of a better word, when they are unsafe or when they are victimized, and it is the sort of thing that is completely unacceptable, and that we all want to work together to have be something that we would study at best historically and be eradicated. And so the focus on prevention, I absolutely agree with. And what I think is innovative, and it's an unfortunate way to drive innovation, but is nonetheless innovative about the approach that President Kaler has taken, refers back actually indirectly to what I said earlier about equity, which is it leverages the know-how of experts on campus and takes a public health and arguably population health approach to sexual assault as an epidemic and then leverages what we know about trying to mitigate and ultimately eradicate epidemics so that we can get to where we want to be, which is zero. So that type of real applied science around eradication, I think, is what a university brings to the table that other subject matter experts or institutions do not, and I'm really hoping that that leads us someplace that we would like to go, in combination with really strong support as we are on our way, hopefully, to zero, unfortunately still happening, and making sure that students who are victims have allies, have support, are getting the resources that they need, and are hopefully supported to where they need to go after having such a horrible life event. And then last but not least, the part that is the most operational but is still critically important, which is compliance, which has been of late a moving target for us in higher education with recent changes, recent guidance on Title IX, and all of us in higher education adjusting what we're doing so that we, of course, fully comply with the law. But at least, and importantly, the new compliance standards do not in any way undermine the work that we're doing in prevention and in support. So we can keep pushing forward there so that if we get those right, then the compliance issue becomes, in a perfect world, an automatic.
Right. UMD is the second largest system campus and a vital hub of abundant research productivity and outreach activity. At UMD, we have maintained a steadfast commitment to public education, the public good, comprehensive liberal education, and the land-grant mission of the University of Minnesota. What have you done in the past to advance these kinds of commitments, and what are some ways in which you might advance these UMD commitments as a system president?
Yeah, so land-grant multi-campus public model, I think, is what is best about public higher education. I think it is even though it has challenges, the architecture that puts those of us who are committed and have made our lives around higher education, in the way we serve our students, in the way we work professionally as faculty and staff, I absolutely believe it is the best model. And I think there are different ways to do it, but I do think public land-grant multi-campus, particularly with extension offices, is one of the best ways. It makes it just physically so much more of an option to touch the state, around the state, and be of service to the state, around the state. And I've seen both. I was in the University of Missouri is a 4-campus land grant with extension offices. The University of South Carolina is not the land grant. Clemson University, you may be familiar with, but does not, and has the extension offices, but is not a multi-campus system. The University of South Carolina is the multi-campus system with 8 campuses in all corners of the state. And so all of those different models, but in particular the one here, gives us the ability to be in a position to create elevated communities and gives us the flexibility to define those communities at the same time, but in lots of different ways. So of course we have our campus communities, the 5 of them, and then how they all fit together. And we have the communities we serve in our own geographies. We have greater Minnesota, we have a major metropolitan area, and the structure puts us in every one of those places and puts us in a position to obviously start with instruction of students and help them learn what they need to lead a life well lived. It enables us to approach research questions that impact the unique needs of this state and the different challenges and opportunities that every state has, but that are idiosyncratic to Minnesota. And it allows us to have a global impact in being able to lead research, inquiry, and discovery, scholarship, performance, conversation that is relevant and can move the needle as we are a global society as well. And it's hard to imagine a better way to be involved in elevation than that.
This is a logical follow-up, and that is, how would you care for the liberal arts emphasis from an administrative perspective?
So national conversation, as we all know, and I myself was a philosophy major as an undergraduate and went to a tiny liberal arts college on a bucolic Rolling Hill campus where we had an incredibly lovely way of learning, thinking, and being prepared for leading a life well lived that I am still navigating and figuring out myself. But because of my own life experience and because of the incredible gift that I've had of being in the company of students for the bulk of my career. I am an absolute believer in the value of liberal arts education, either as a program of study or as a component of other programs of study, and its importance in our mission as educators and what it means to make a commitment to educate a student. And I think students can find it and in their own way where they are, both in terms of the size of campus they want to, in which they want to do their studies, or whether they want it to be their program of study or a component of their program of study. But I don't think we can allow ourselves to let temporary trends dictate what it means to provide an education. Now we have to be aware, we have to pay attention, we have to be able to be nimble within certain margins, but it is very important to recognize that things trend and that we are literally hundreds of years old and that we need to be able to take a step back and think about things in a bigger sense. It's one of the luxuries of legacy. And so I also think that there are indices that this push that we're feeling, the tension that we're feeling in the humanities, liberal arts, social sciences, and some of the areas in which we have data to see student demand ebbing and flowing, that I think give us optimism that we're coming out of the trend. And I'll give just one example, which is Project Aristotle, which was a project that Amazon did, maybe, I'm not sure, recently, where they did an internal study of some of their fast track employees trying to figure out why some people are more likely to fast track and some people aren't. And what they discovered was those who were fast tracking either had in their base a liberal arts education or something about them exhibited what would be considered the components of a liberal arts education: critical thinking, communication skills, ability to cope with uncertainty, a variety of the sorts of things that we would align pretty directly with the learning outcomes of liberal arts education. You can get to those in other ways, but they're hallmarks of liberal arts education. And I could give you more examples that in the totality make me very optimistic that we're going to see the swing in the other direction.
So a follow-up question also about the arts. Music, theater, dance, and visual arts. Are the arts relevant? And if so, how so in a university setting?
Well, yes. How about that? Next question. No, I'm just kidding. So yes, the arts are relevant. An appreciation for the arts is part of an education. And I think that different people will want to do that more deeply than others, and that's okay, because we all have our choices to make about our own perspectives and how the beauty of our society is being able to have a say in your education and what it means to you. But an appreciation for the arts, the exploration of the arts, the context of the arts is part of what it means to enjoy, to discern, to analyze, and those are skills and learning outcomes that we should have regardless. But in the study of the arts and in the appreciation of the arts, we offer a very direct path to those learning outcomes. So not having that available, that's incomprehensible to me.
Thank you. What are your thoughts on the role and value of campus recreation, recreational sports, outdoor program on the college and university campus? Where do you see rec sports fitting in to the university structure?
That's the first time I've had that question. So thank you, whoever asked it. Thank you, all of you who are asking questions, but especially that person.
So my person, so I thank them too.
Okay, good. So I'm a terrible athlete myself, and I tried really hard to do intramural sports, and it was an abysmal failure, and I ended up spraining my ankle, and it was really terrible. But somehow I gave birth to people who are really good athletes and have really enjoyed being athletes both in high school and in college. And I'm a fan, so I would approach that from a couple of points of view. So number one, I think that a healthy body is part of a healthy mind, and that it's great that it's part of our responsibility to make that available. I also think keeping students busy with healthy activities is a good idea. So I'll say that. And I think that sports, there's a book by a fellow named Franklin Ford, How Soccer Explains the World, if any of you have ever read it. But he's an enormous soccer fan and writes an incredible book going, in each chapter explores the soccer club of different regions around the world and how that experience of being a fan or playing in that part of the world is a a proxy for different cultural or historical questions or issues. It's a quick read and it's really good, and I recommend it, and the royalties should be sent to the University of Minnesota Duluth. But the but the idea behind it is that participating in sport, being a fan of the passion around the identity of cheering for your friends, family, team, community, is something in which we become a community. It's an anchor to a community. And so I think that we are a community, and so having sport available either for participation or to cheer for creates this, it's a catalyzer of that sense of community.
Okay. I have 3 really good questions about the budget, so I'm going to try to stage these in sort of the theoretical to the more
Can't
concrete.
wait.
Yeah. As you may know, there has long been and remains a good deal of concern at UMD about how state budgetary contributions to the university are allocated among the campuses. What do you see as a university president's role in facilitating clear and transparent budgeting processes that allow for both equitable resource allocations across campuses and collecting and sharing information necessary to make appropriate inter-campus budgetary comparisons?
Okay, you want to do them one at a time? Or do they?
I have 2 more.
Okay, all right. Alrighty. So I'll just speak from experience on this. It's a little more experiential than philosophical, to tell you the truth, because people will do what you incent them to do, as I said earlier. And so budgets, I think, are not dissimilar from individual salary. It's just at the institutional level. And so what the University of South Carolina is in the middle of doing right now is switching from what would be called historical budgeting, where you, I'm going to oversimplify it, but where you essentially receive what you received before with slight tweaks, versus incentive budgeting, where through a shared governance process, you establish how you want to align resources with strategic goals that you want to accomplish. And so it becomes more predictable and less tied to what you've done in the past and more focused on what you might do or can do or are striving to do in the future. And it is intended to drive the institutions, in this case, because South Carolina is a system, towards strategic goals that were also created and some of which are evolving in a shared governance model. So that process is difficult, not surprisingly. It requires trade-offs, hard conversations. At the end of the day, in a constrained resource environment, you can't say yes to everything that deserves a yes. And that's actually one of the hardest things about administration, is that is part of your reality, because everyone I know in administration would like to say yes to every good thing. I mean, if it was a bad idea, it's easy to say no. The hard part is when it's a good idea or something that is deserving and you still have to say no or modify your yes. But at least when you have a transparent, incentive-driven budget model, it is explainable in a way that can make receiving a no more understandable, sometimes less personal. And I think that makes these kinds of decisions easier. Now, I will say that when we began this work, we did so with outside consulting so that there was a best practices mentality that sometimes is very difficult to have in-house, and a committee that was representative, and a pretty healthy appetite for it, and it's still a multi-year process. It's not a quick fix, and it requires difficult conversations. But we've been around for a long time. It's worth taking the time to try to get things eventually in the right way where you want them to be.
So this question is related toward the decision makers. What would be a possible strategy for engaging the Board of Regents and the state legislature in creating a plan to reconcile our structural deficit here without further damaging our current programs and jeopardizing our future growth?
Yes. So, well, at the end of the day, we all work for the Board of Regents. So I think that one sort of speaks for itself. And then legislatively, I think there are different approaches in this kind of conversation with both local delegation and, of course, statewide delegation, that we remind our legislature what we offer, the value of an investment into the system, the campuses, and what that is likely to yield. And I think when those conversations are had in a way that makes sense, then they are the best way to have those kinds of conversations with your elected officials. There is a whole lot that can be done, and I've already talked about this with several people today, and it's been a pretty frequent topic this week for me, about making sure that we really rethink as a higher education community how we talk about the value of what we do, which makes many of us uncomfortable because the work is the way we do our work as faculty, and sometimes the particular roles of staff, and even in our students, it feels like bragging, and that is not something that is rewarded in our community. But there's a difference between bragging and being advocates, and I think in the process of advocacy, there is probably some gain, and I think the climate is right for it.
Good. And this last budget question is stated very simply. Are you going to look at the discrepancy between the level of state funding that is allocated to UMTC and UMD?
Yes, so I am aware of the conversation that's going on, and I'm also unaware of the nuances within the budget. I think that everyone would understand that. But what I can say today is that I need to get up to speed on the budget and the nuances of the question, and then I would look forward to the conversation and seeing how we can try to find an appropriate resolution.
Good. Minnesota is among the states with the highest amounts of student loan debt, and UMD, unfortunately, is the public institution in Minnesota with the highest average student loan debt. How will you address this problem, relating your answer specifically to our campus?
Yeah, I would love to relate it specifically, but I really don't know enough about why that might be. So with apologies, I'm going to have to take that one a little from 30,000 feet rather than be specific. But student loan debt and the student loan debt crisis is a national conversation, and we're all worried about it, even if you don't hit the metric the way that this system does or this campus does. And what the best practices that are emerging on this are, of course, looking for a variety of ways to keep costs down so that you can at least hold tuition. It's very difficult to roll back tuition, but to hold tuition, finding other types of partnerships to provide revenue support for students philanthropically through corporate partnerships, through other types of opportunities. Those, I think, are already on everyone's radar. And then there is a lot of conversation around financial education for students, because we want to make sure that how they're making their choices about the debt that they're incurring aligns with their educational pursuits, so that they're taking the absolute minimum amount of debt that they need in order to progress towards graduation, when they would then, of course, be earning. And the other thing I will say about that, and I have colleagues in student affairs where I am now who Lisa knows very well, who would say that you have to look at the student loan debt crisis in the context of the earning potential of the student as well. That it doesn't happen in a vacuum, that there is such a thing in the right way and in the right amounts as good debt, so that students can invest in their education, and then we need to make sure that what they're investing in results in a return. So all of that has to come together in both practice and philosophy to try to make sure that our students are getting what they need from their education and the costs that they incur to do it.
This may be my favorite question.
Oh.
What is your level of willingness to take risk rather than play it safe or pander to both sides? Yeah. Am I right?
I've never jumped out of an airplane, so we'll work backwards from that.
Okay.
So that's a really good question. It's a hard thing to define about oneself. You know, it's almost the sort of thing where I kind of want to kick it and say, you'd have to ask the people who work with me. I'm sure they'd be happy to answer that, but I'm going to try. So I think that I have a selective risk appetite, and here's how I would define that. So I think that there are certain things about what universities do that we've been doing for a really long time exceptionally well that would be devastating to a society to have go away. And they aren't the kinds of things that get a lot of attention because we've been doing them for so long. They're almost ubiquitously part of our communities and part of our lives. And about those things, I would say I have a very low risk appetite, that they should be nurtured and stewarded and protected and continue to just keep going. And on the other end of the spectrum, when we start talking about things like alternate revenue and distributed learning and really new ways of thinking about who we are that layer on top of, not supplant, what we do at our core, I would say I have pretty healthy appetite and have launched some programs that people scratched their chins over, and most of which worked, some of which worked really well, and some of which worked less well. But we're all worthwhile to take a risk on, even upon reflection. I would say my appetite's pretty healthy there.
Good. Accessibility to websites, media, and software applications is a compliance area that often lags behind other areas. What experiences and strategies would you propose to more strongly support accessibility and disability services?
Yeah, I'll tell you a little story. There's always these humbling aha moments in what we do that that surprise you, and that you always look back on and appreciate, but aren't always fun in the moment, right? So, University of South Carolina is updating the whole website all the way down, all the layers. I don't even want to tell you how many pages of content a website like that organically becomes across a multi-campus system. It's an enormous project. And of course, that's the appropriate time to do the overhaul on accessibility, and that's happening. So the simple answer to the question is yes, you have to do this. It's part of your obligation. You have to do it. It's not only legally required, it's what you're supposed to do. You must do it. But it is shocking that even when you have that commitment, how often you discover where you slipped, and even when you're purposefully trying to do it right. And so the good news is you fix it, and you have the technology to fix it. And so I think what's happening now is it's becoming absolutely so much easier to leverage technology that we used to only use selectively, and that is starting to come through in multiple places in order to make instructional content more accessible. And that is great, and that's a wonderful cornerstone. But we also can't just say, okay, box checked, and now we're done. We have to be working together with people who are living this every single day from multiple points of view to make sure that we aren't being too echo chamber about what we do and assuming that we know what needs to be done, so that we can continuously update and improve both services provided, access, but also inclusiveness and sense of belonging.
How did you become involved in research around coverage for individuals with AIDS, as reflected in your conference presentations from the 90s?
You all think I remember the 90s? My gosh, I think that's a compliment. No, I'm just kidding, of course. So my research stream, when I was actively engaged in research, was about employer obligations to employees and the insurance consequences of those obligations, broadly speaking. And that was the spine, and off of that spine came research in a few different areas: workers' compensation benefits, employment discrimination, the challenge of expensive disease, which of course at the time, the one that was really changing the risk modeling that insurance companies were doing was AIDS, but had also evolved into exploration of other cost issues that had a social justice component in later projects, and then also included just governance and the behavior of the directors and officers of the institution, because they buy insurance for what they do too. I was a risk management faculty member in the business school, and I'm a lawyer by training and taught legal studies, and that was my area of research. And what my general question that I was asking with specific examples was really around the idea that people behave differently at work than they do outside of work, and how we treat each other when we are in the employer-employee relationship is different than how we treat each other when we're sitting in a room together or in a community activity together, neighbors, any other way that you know each other. And why do we have to regulate that? And why can you buy insurance to protect yourself from that? Struck me as interesting questions. And so that was sort of the nature of that particular piece, and really the whole thing. And congratulations to anyone who looked at my CV, and if you're having insomnia, I would be very happy to assist you with a solution, and if not a cure.
Very good. You've spent your entire career in the academic sector. How will your strengths bring change over stagnation to the university system, and what will your weaknesses do to us?
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So I actually didn't spend my entire career in higher education. I practiced law for a few years right out of law school before I went into higher education. And And so many people look at that and say she's non-traditional, although many of us in the academy had careers before we entered the academy. But I think it's also because I have a JD instead of a PhD that sort of has this non-traditional bent to it. I do think, though, that my experience of being in an applied field before I came into the academy, of course I teach and researched in an applied field, but I was a JD in the business school, as you all have here, and I have colleagues here who I know from our shared participation in conferences, that you're by nature interdisciplinary, you're not the typical, and so if you want to be part of your unit's community, if you want to be part of a shared, sort of a brown bag mentality around research and discovery, then you have to have, when you're not in a mainstream field, an open mindset. And that has served me very well as I've tried to incent research in areas about which I know anywhere from a little to absolutely nothing, because of course nobody knows about every area of research and discovery, particularly when surrounded by deep dive experts. So it gave me a sensibility about what it means to set up either a program or even just a philosophy, whether it's resources or other kinds of things that create incentives, so that faculty, regardless of discipline or area of exploration, had a way to find what they needed. And today I do that in partnership very closely with the Vice President for Research, not surprising there, in different grant programs, different support programs, and the different ways that some fiscal, some time, some grad students, some et cetera, depending on the type of work that the faculty member does across the campus. So I would say that's the strength, and then I would say I have no weaknesses, so you have nothing to worry about. How about that?
What is your experience with Indigenous communities, and how do you see Indigenous ways of knowing as a valid methodology in the academy?
Yeah, and I've read with interest about the work that you're doing here and the unique programs that you have here. So there are Indigenous communities all through the areas in which I've lived and where I am now, primarily, although not exclusively. We have a good partnership with the Catawba Nation, which is along the Carolinas, and one of our campuses in Lancaster, South Carolina, has Native American Studies and a relationship with the Sovereign Nation, and that results in both beyond the classroom and community work. There's a center, and then some curriculum and instruction, which has been really interesting for me to learn more about the specific attributes of the history there, that nation, and how that can intersect in a higher ed partnership. I think one of the things that, of course, this community knows very well, but is not always well known, is that doesn't mean that it would apply literally anywhere else but there, because these are sovereign nations with different histories and different challenges, cultures, opportunities for learning, partnership, instruction, et cetera. And so the idea of well, this worked here, so we're done, is obviously not the case. And so I think that there are different beautiful aspects of culture and shared perspective and cross-cultural perspective that of course weave into our commitment as a community. And there are also ways of learning about painful attributes of history that are iterative and can help guide us into the future, either in research, instruction, or community engagement. And the beauty of what I see in the early, what I'm able to learn so far about what's going on here, is that you're really actively and purposefully looking for that intersection, which I think is excellent.
Let's say a group of student activists comes to your office and refuses to leave until you agree to meet with them and hear their grievances. How do you react and respond?
Let's say that I've experienced that, because I have. So, I mean, what I said was, come on in. I mean, that's, I will say to everyone in the room, and in particular the students who I'm asking you why you aren't at your exam, but in any case, is the expression of student voice is cornerstone. And while it is stressful to be approached that way, it is also productive. And so if you aren't willing as a member of a leadership team to hear that and receive it, then it's very difficult to hear and receive what you need to hear about what students need and want. And their perspective makes us all better. Now, I personally appreciate when it's done in calm way with a shared conversation built on a relationship of trust, so that we can work together towards improvement, solutions where possible, at a minimum mitigation, or sometimes it's not even about an action item. It depends on what the concern is at the time. And I ask that of student government leaders, and I make sure we're talking all the time and not just when we have a problem, so that hopefully if we get to that point, we're in a position to have a conversation. It has not always worked that way. We've had active student protest at the University of South Carolina. Everyone knows what happened at the University of Missouri. I had left before that happened, but only immediately before, I mean literally weeks before, and my daughter was a student there while all of that was going on, so still felt very personal and engaged. But that's, I mean, come on in.
We talked a little bit about balance in that dual role that the president would have. I think a good follow-up is, how would you navigate how will you ensure that your vice presidents also successfully navigate that balance and duality?
Yeah, well, they work for me, so if I ask them to do it, I'd like to think they'd do it at the end of the day. I mean, I really don't think it's more complicated than that. There's complication in the planning, how do you make it actually work? What's the operational process that you need to have? But in the commitment, top down.
Can we give you an office at UMD?
You can give me whatever you want.
So how do you see your role with this campus vis-a-vis the Chancellor? I mean, how does that work?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I don't mean to draw a comparison that's not point by point, but not altogether dissimilar from provost to dean when the provost shows up in an academic unit and comes in, right? So I've talked about this with, I'll have the great fortune of meeting every chancellor over the course of this week. And that when we talk about balance, I want to be very clear and say the intention is to not usurp. You don't want to get the balance. You don't want to go too far the other way. The intention is to support and create a team, and the chancellors are part of the president's cabinet, and you want that really nice, not just two-way street, but really a cycle, because it's not just Twin Cities Duluth, it's also Duluth Rochester, obviously, and then with all of the system campuses, and you really want that to be a productive conversation and not a disruptive conversation. The chancellor is the chancellor, and I absolutely 100% believe that. And so finding a way where the campus feels supported by the president and also recognized by the president and the president's team as part of the system, I think that's the commitment. How you actually get there requires an open conversation. And I would like to think, just based on the experiences that I've had in the past, that when you're able to put something like that openly on the table early, before you have the conflict arise, you can sort of assess shared expectations and see where they align. And, oh, I didn't realize you saw that way. Let's try to set it up this way. Let's decide now, before anything even happens, that at the end of the semester we're going to revisit and see how it felt, and if it's working, tweak accordingly and try again. That those are the ways that you try to find that sweet spot.
Well, we're coming to the end of what has been an amazing hour, and I was so pleased when I first met Provost Gabel to see a champ pin on her lapel. So I have a bit of a softball.
Can we shine a light, please?
Yeah.
Can we? Okay.
Are you a cat person or a dog person?
I'm almost insulted by that question. May I just say, no. And I'll just add, that I think everybody might have seen where I went to graduate school, so saying bulldogs rolls very easily off the tongue for me.
Indeed. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming, everyone, today. And Provost Gabel will allow you to have the last word and maybe close our time together with some remarks.
Oh, thank you. I never get the last word, so I am delighted. So I'm not going to take a long time. I know everybody is really busy. I am so honored and humbled to be here with you. I thank you for really providing such interesting and thoughtful questions. I sincerely hope that the answers were just the beginning of an ongoing conversation and that we have the chance to talk more again very soon. I very much appreciate your time and attention, and I'm very grateful to have the chance to be here. So thank you very, very much.